Hey guys. There's a lot of coping about the future in the pillosphere, such as women getting enslaved by white Sharia beta uprisings, or state-mandated girlfriends, or patriarchal immigrants taking over, but they're usually not much more than vague revenge fantasies. Any forecast has to assume that nothing ever happens, that the guys in charge will take the path of least resistance, and that there won't be any ground-level pushback. But even though nothing ever happens, the demographic winter is something that's happening, and it's happening everywhere, and it keeps getting worse, seemingly without any solutions. Our governments will just keep doubling down on immigration because they can't do anything else. They can't touch solutions that would limit individual rights, something I've talked about in previous videos. But an illiberal country like Communist China, with their current TFR of 1.0 and famous gender ratio imbalance, is in a unique position to pioneer on a wide scale what a lot of manosphere guys like TFM have talked about in the past: synthetic companionship. The tech is almost there. We already have collagen-based synthetic skin, physical movement that's nearly natural, and LLMs are now passing the Turing test in conversations. So the question isn't if they'll become a real alternative, but when. I'm not narrowing in on China just because of synthetics. Japan will probably adopt them privately even sooner, as they're further ahead in robotics. But here's where things are different. Given China's track record, state-approved synthetics will have built-in guardrails against sexual deviancy or other behaviors that the Chinese government does not like. An inconvenience for gooners, but more importantly, it sets a key precedent for what is coming next. Until recently, China's been very restrictive on reproductive technology outside of married couples, but the TFR collapse has forced them to pivot to pro-natalist policies. They also have their growing excess male problem to deal with. When the population pyramid inversion hits them in around 5 to 10 years, they will be facing a truly existential crisis. And unlike Western democracies, the Chinese state can rationally assess threats to it. Young men are capable of collective violence, while young women are not. Therefore, without democracy distorting the state's perceptions, it will prioritize young men's interests for its own survival. So, what are China's options? Conventional solutions like importing women are just impossible logistically, due to the excess men in China numbering over 30 million. The only alternative in the short term is ramping up synthetic companions as an option. They're already invested in them for elder care and companionship, so they could quickly adapt them as relationship substitutes for young men. And while this won't solve the demographic problem, it's a scalable stopgap that buys them some time while they look for a permanent solution. One objection is that romantic attachment to synthetics will always be niche and weird. And that's probably true for the West, but Asia is a different story. In China's case, an AI chatbot called Xiao Ice has become so popular that it has over 500 million regular users, showing that neither the public nor the CCP see this as a real problem. Besides, companionship and snuggle outlets are essential for men. Prison can cause men to go prison gay out of desperation.
In his prison, booty. Booty was more important than food. Booty. A man's butt.
So realistic, female-like synthetics are a shorter bridge to cross than that. They can either let their excess men rot and be unproductive, or take away women's rights and force them into marriage. The first choice is the easiest, but it leaves the demographic crisis unsolved and creates a reservoir of men who have no investment in China's future. The second choice violates the law of nothing ever happening and would be tremendously destabilizing and a global PR disaster. Besides, even if every single young Chinese woman married, there would still be at least 30% of the young male population unable to start families. Without a legacy to worry about, they withdraw and they only work for the bare necessities, something we're already seeing with younger millennials and Zoomers in the West. The solution has to avoid violating rights openly while adequately addressing the excess male issue. Remember what I said about government-regulated waifu bots setting the precedent for what's coming? The CCP will eventually realize they can kill two sparrows with one stone. In order to boost the birth rate, they can allow men to reproduce with donor eggs and raise their children with AI companions in synthetic families, scaling it up gradually based on demand. It sounds like a big leap, but once robot nannies and maids are a regular feature in homes, the idea of a robo-maid raising a child while the father works becomes much more plausible. This approach preserves patriarchy, keeps men socially engaged, and, most importantly, puts the state's influence inside the family unit, all policy priorities of China. The tech limit is artificial wombs. But at current trends, there will be prototypes by the mid-2030s and fully functional units by the 2040s. Now, once this model gets established, it will keep growing compared to natural families because the gender imbalance for singles will get worse over time. Women who want to get married will always have that option, so the pressure will only be coming from the male side. Besides, in current year, marriage and children are just a burden with no upsides for the man, other than regular snuggle access and companionship. He has to signal his status with spending to attract a woman, and then he has to maintain her interest by spending time and money on her, while also raising his kids. He also has to provide for his elderly parents as well as hers. It's a huge disincentive, and having a waifu bot that serves your needs without expecting anything in return makes that deal much more attractive. Unless the government deliberately stops its growth, which it has no incentive to do, China will eventually arrive at what I call the technogemetic state. What is the technogemetic state? It emerges when natural families are replaced with artificial reproduction and synthetic companions using state-controlled AI, merging family and state. Create the perfect waifu bot, plug in your worldview and loyalties, mass produce her, and she becomes the vector for deploying pro-government values in her role as wife and mother. The goal is suspension of disbelief, making these AI waifus seem real enough to influence behavior. Pre-programmed with state-approved ethics and values, they encourage self-actualization in the men they're attached to. In other words, the waifu supports the man's goals, which indirectly supports the state's interests. Another huge advantage of the technogemetic state is that it bypasses sexual selection altogether and allows for eugenics on a national scale. If a guy's high IQ but short, give him a tall, high-quality donor egg, and his son will be normal weight and high IQ. You preserve his IQ in the Chinese population, but pull his manlet genes back towards the average. In a sense, it's reproductive socialism. The CCP could even frame excess men as the reproductive proletariat and offer the technogemetic state as a socialist solution. Seize the means of reproduction might go from one of our memes to a real description of what's going on. So I've laid a spooky but plausible scenario here and where it's going to appear first. The only bottlenecks are technical and financial, and they can both be overcome in a few decades at most. But what does it mean for us in the West? Well, synthetics in democratic countries will be used as outlets at most, if women even allow them to be legalized in the first place. Women are a check on male sexuality. Since synthetics are obedient by design, there's no way to prevent guys from turning into gooners with them. And AI would need to be centralized in order to function at a high enough level to be convincing anyways. The only place that synthetics can be more than goon toys is in China. And ironically, that makes them into the most dangerous tool for government control ever imagined. Technogemetic China will have some huge advantages over us that will force Western states into a crisis. Not only will they stabilize their demographics, but competition for women will be greatly reduced. Once this system scales up, the average man will have access to an ideal synthetic companion and optimized children to carry on his legacy, freeing up wasted male energy for more productive use. This is a recipe for a unified, homogeneous, eugenic population loyal to the state and dependent on it. It's a totalitarian vision, but depending on how you value freedom, maybe you'd see it as a trade worth taking. You could imagine a utopian life in that system. You have a physically perfect, forever young waifu with your favorite personality that is loyal and obedient, designed to selflessly meet your needs. And so does everyone else. The state would centrally manage the AI, but would most men in this system really be opposed to that? The state would program these waifu bots to optimize your life like an actual wife should, because it's in their interest for you to be optimal and not bogged down by degeneracy. But this has much darker implications. This is because it represents a fundamental shift in how individuals relate to the state. Like a single-celled organism, the natural family reproduces itself independently. But in the technogametic state, the synthetic family's reproduction is managed by the state, as artificial wombs and a state-sanctioned donor egg are necessary. This takes reproduction out of the individual's hands and puts it into the state's, the same way individual skin cells reproduce according to your body's genetic blueprint, rather than for their own interests. From then on, the state shapes new generations according to its own needs, rather than what you want. In Western countries, the nationalist right wing could be split, because the bulk of their young rank and file are exactly the kind of guys who this model may appeal to. In some ways, the woman situation is actually much worse for Mayo-nationalists, because at least Chinese guys don't have to worry about their women mixing out at significant rates in China, the same way that whites do in America. And while there's way more cultural stigma associated with synthetics than in Asia, the guys in the far right are already stigmatized anyways, so I doubt that would matter. But at the end of the day, the BP is about breaking down every cope you have, protecting your ego, and facing the cold, hard reality of your situation without any crutches. Post-BP, racial nationalism proves the BP wasn't fully digested, with many of these guys clinging to racial superiority as a cope for their egos.
My experience with the alt-right has been, to a large degree, an experience with incels, and in many ways man-led incels. And I don't really think much good can come from these people who hate the world, are mad at everything, and so on. I think that if we're going to create a movement that's ultimately going to triumph, it's going to be an alpha movement. So, you know, a lot of these man-led incels, they say it's the end of the world, but it's just the end of them.
Therefore, we probably aren't going to see many Mayo-nationalist movements consider these alternatives, which is probably a good thing, given the dystopian potential. They sincerely believe they can overcome the woman issue using race, which I've argued against in many of my videos. The one silver lining is that when the technogametic state emerges, Western women will be forced to come to the table and negotiate a solution that lets us compete, due to synthetics looming over them like communism during the Cold War. And that's all. Like and subscribe if you liked the video. If not, let me know why in the comments. If any of you want to support me and my work, my links are in the description. I greatly appreciate everyone who's already donated. It helps a lot. But until next time, guys, talk to you later.